Hi friends, today I want to talk about my new favorite book. It is another one by Brandon Sanderson. If you've been following along, I've been reading through the Cosmere, and this book is Warbreaker. Lord of Colors, what a good book Warbreaker is. I had really high expectations for this because I loved Elantris, I really enjoyed Mistborn, and if you follow along on Brandon Sanderson's website as to where to begin with the Cosmere, he says, those are probably a good starting point, either Elantris or Mistborn. Elantris was his first published novel, but Mistborn is his first big trilogy and series, so you can kind of get your feet wet with that. And then Warbreaker is a standalone series within the Cosmere itself. I heard really great things, and I was not disappointed. It was such a phenomenal book. I honestly cannot say enough good things. The magic system was so witty, and it was one of those things that after you read it, you thought, why has no one thought about doing this before now? It makes perfect sense. Color and breath, you breathe life into things. It just makes perfect sense, and we'll get more into that in a couple of minutes. I really loved all of the characters. We have a couple of deities, one called the God King Susebron. We have Lightsong, the bold or the brave. We have Blushweaver. We have two kingdoms that are going to be at potential war with each other. We have two sisters that are trying to figure out their place in this vast world and where they fall in the hierarchy of everything. Everything about this story was beautifully done. Sanderson did such a phenomenal job of writing it. It is the first book that I've actually really enjoyed the love story to it. I didn't mind it as much in Elantris compared to Mistborn, but he took it to a whole other level in this book. All in all, really can't say enough good things about Warbreaker, so let's jump in. We have a royal family that has basically been exiled, and the king is trying to decide as to whether or not he holds to a treaty that he signed 20 years prior with the city of Tiltalir, and that is where the God King lives. The deal that he made is that he would send one of his daughters to wed this God King, who is supposed to be tyrannical and pretty terrible, and he's not really wanting to send the daughter that he had trained in order to take on this role. He wants to send no one, but he ends up sending his youngest daughter, Ciri. Ciri is a rambunctious young girl. She doesn't really like to follow the rules. She's independent, she's free-spirited, which are traits that are not generally admired in her home kingdom. It is rather obnoxious to be ostentatious. Ostentatious can be anything from having any color other than brown adorned on your body, having any scent or perfume, anything that makes you stand out as being different is considered as ostentatious in this religion. On the flip side, everything is bold and beautiful and luscious in the city of Tiltalir, which is run, we know at this point, by the God King. Our story begins with the journey of Ciri into this new world. She's not really sure what this is going to entail. She's not sure why her life has been upended by her father like this, and she's trying to figure out how she's going to fulfill her role, which is to provide an heir for the God King. Simultaneously, her sister Vivenna, who was trained for this her whole life, now doesn't understand what her placement is, that she's had all of these years of training and now it's just wasted, and she doesn't really quite know how to adapt. The story begins on that front. A couple other major characters for this story are Vasher and Nightblood. We're not really sure who Vasher is until the end of the book, so I'm not going to get into that quite yet, but Nightblood is his sword, who, yes, is sentient and has a conscience and is probably one of my favorite characters that Sanderson has written. And we have Lightsong the Bold, who is a returned, that is a deity, and we're going to get to that when we start to talk about spoilers, which is going to be now, so I'm going to be talking about spoilers in 3, 2, 1. The magic system in this universe is controlled by breaths and controlled by colors. It's something that's actually quite convoluted, even though it sounds very simplistic, and it's something that you probably won't fully understand unless you read the book. People are each born with one independent breath, and that breath is essentially your essence. It is your life force or your spirit, as one might say. You can sell your breath, or you can willingly give your breath to another person, and you can collect breath. You can lose your breath and still live, but you're just not going to see the world as beautifully as someone who has their breath. Color will be dim to you, your senses won't be as heightened. You can also collect breath, and you will be able to gain new abilities, new powers, and that allows you to do really interesting things. We have the God King, who is supposed to have over probably 50,000 breaths. We have different what are called heightenings, and these are people that have achieved specific amounts of breaths, such as 50, 1,000, 10,000, that type of thing. We learn very quickly on that there are a group of people called the Returned. Returned are deities in Talir, and they are people that have died in some form of heroic way, and they are resurrected. In order to sustain their life, they have to be given a new breath every week. It helps keep them alive. The point of the Returned is that they are supposed to be able to have visions and premonitions in their sleep when they're dreaming. They tell them to their priests, and that is supposed to help them prepare as best they can for whatever events might befall the kingdom, the God King, etc. The Returned in this story are actually really enjoyable. Out of all of the religious factions I have read of Sanderson, which so far has been Mistborn and Elantris, like I said, I loved this one the most because I found it incredibly fascinating and absolutely hysterical that the Returned deity, whose name is Lightsong, doesn't believe in his own divinity and doesn't really believe in divinity at all or being a god. And this is something he struggles with for the majority of the book, and I actually found his character to be absolutely compelling. I was laughing out loud multiple times while reading the book, which is not something that happens very often. I think the last time that happened was when I read Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. The story really starts to get moving when Ciri is brought to the palace of the God King, and she realizes very quickly that she has very little say as to anything between them and their relationship. Priests run amok and essentially are everywhere in the palace of the gods, which is where all of the Return lived, and at the center of that is where the God King lives. She is informed by his priests that she is not allowed to speak with him, nor is she allowed to kiss him. She is solely there to provide her body and her womb in order to produce an heir. And she has not been prepared for anything like this her entire life. She had no idea. She had minor instructions, but she didn't pay attention in those courses as to anything about the history of this city, the history of the God King, anything like this. She enters into his bedchamber and for many, many nights strips naked and just sits in front of him while he watches from across the room in darkness, and nothing happens. She's not really sure why nothing is happening, if he's interested by her or if she's not interested by her. And I actually really liked the way that Sanderson started to build this relationship. It was quite filled with tension, but it was an intriguing tension, and it was one that I thought was substantially better than any of the love story in Mistborn. Sorry for people that really ship Vin and Elend. Sorry. Vivenna is the princess who is actually trained to marry the God King, and she feels like she's been completely displaced. She doesn't really understand her worth or her purpose in life anymore, and therefore she decides to journey to Talir in order to help regain control of her life as well as save her sister, because she believes that the God King is an absolute tyrant and a menace, and she doesn't want to subject her sister, who has had zero training for any of what is about to unfold upon her. She doesn't want her to have to bear his baby or his child and produce an heir. It's a really interesting character arc for Vivenna because I found her to be wildly annoying for most of the book, and she's very holier than thou. In this book, there are two religious factions. There is the one that the Idrians follow, which is one of sensibility, not being ostentatious. And then, of course, in Talir, you have the Returned, you have the God King, and that is the religion. And she finds it difficult that anyone could worship them when it is a violation in her mind to use breath in order to do anything other than have your one singular breath. Sanderson did a really good job with Vivenna, I found, in humbling her character well into the story. She comes to the city of Talir. She ends up finding herself kind of mixed in with this gang who she believes to actually be working for her, but it is a big reveal later on that they are in fact not working for her. They are trying to establish a war between the Idrians and the people of Talir, and it was a really well done reveal. I found that the mercenaries that she was paired with were very akin to the characters of Pain and Panic from Disney's Hercules, if anyone else is familiar with those characters. I really found that her character arc became more interesting though when she becomes homeless, and it was a really well done way of showing how people can become so desperate that they are willing to forego their morals, their beliefs in order to survive. And in terms of it being a survivalist story, I thought that he did a really great job with Vivenna's character, and I found that to be wildly interesting. While all of this is happening, we have this character called Vasher. Vasher is trying to stop something or get involved with a few different things, and we don't really know what that is. We know that he is a morally questionable character. He is very prone to killing people with his sword, Nightblood, whom I love very, very deeply. He is eventually going to get paired up with Vivenna. In the meantime, we know that he breaks into one of the homes of the deities, and this creates an uproar, and it gives Lightsong a purpose. Lightsong has prided himself in being the laziest of the gods. He doesn't like participating in petitions, which is where you have to listen to your, essentially your worshipers or your followers come and ask you to grant their petition. And what this means for the Returned is that they give their life to grant your wish. The Returned, as I said, are only kept alive by getting a new breath every single week. However, their purpose is to find one cause that is worthy above all others, and that is what they will give their life to, and they will die a second time. Lightsong has very little interest in doing this. He doesn't really understand why he was brought back, because the Returned have no memories of their former life and who they are. He goes on this really interesting and fun journey as to trying out new skills and trying to figure out exactly who he was as a person prior to becoming a Returned. I loved his banter with another goddess called Blushweaver. Blushweaver is a voluptuous and beautiful goddess, and there's a lot of very clear sexual innuendos that are taking place between the two of them, but I actually found it to be quite funny. I found out after reading the book that Sanderson wrote this book while on his honeymoon, and it really made a lot of sense to me when you get into a lot of the sexual content and a lot of the romance aspect. It would make sense that someone who is in the throes of a new marriage and is happy and is in love would write this book. Yuri is trying to figure out how she can form a relationship with her new husband, and she comes to understand that his tongue has been cut out. And this is because in order to have breath and use it, you have to utter commands. Something called awakening. Awakening means that you can awaken things such as straw or fabric, clothing, to do your bidding. You can awaken people that used to be alive. They are called the lifeless, and they can form an army, which they have. And they have taken away his ability, and he is in fact actually quite a sad character than the God King. He has the mind of a small child at times just because he hasn't really been taught anything by his priest. He doesn't understand that in order to produce an heir, he actually has to have sex with Ciri. He hasn't been taught any of these things. It actually becomes a My Fair Lady scenario in which Ciri takes on the role of doctor and educating him in order to help him understand what's going on, and they form quite a wonderful bond. This leads her to understand that there is a plan to kill Susebron, aka the God King, as soon as an heir is produced. All while this is happening, Sanderson does this beautiful way of weaving into the story that the whole point of the story, while all of these little minor subplots are happening, is that there is going to be a war between these two kingdoms and how they can stop it. And we come to see that Vasher is trying to stop this war. And the end of the book is very typical, I have found now, for having read a few different books of Sanderson, and that the last 100 or so pages, everything starts coming together. It's revealed, and it's revealed in such a beautiful and eloquent way that I loved every aspect of this book. I will say initially, until Vivenna is homeless at one point in the book, I would count how many pages I had to endure of her before I got back to I found people that were more interesting. That changed after she had her little homeless stint. The end of the book, we see that certain characters, aka Lightsong, do not make it because he gives his life to save Susebron, the God King, and everything about this book was moving. I was so touched by all of the characters, their story arcs. I thought Sanderson did a really beautiful way of wrapping everything up neatly and pulling it all together. However, he's left the door open in order to write a potential sequel, which honestly I would love for him to do because I really liked this world and I hope that more stories take place in this world. Vasher and Vivenna end up pairing off at the end, not in a romantic way, which I appreciated, but as a partnership. And I believe, I'm just gonna guess, that they probably show up in more Cosmere material. It just seems like of all the people that are there, that they would probably make Cosmere appearances, as well as, of course, Hoyd, who has a role in this story, which I really enjoyed. All in all, I absolutely love this book. I've now read 5 Sanderson books in the last 3 months. I am super enjoying him. I think he is quickly becoming my favorite author. I have very few things to say that are negative about him, other than typically the way that he writes romance, which in this book I had absolutely zero problem with. I absolutely loved it. This book was a 5 out of 5 for me. Highly recommend. Cannot say enough good things. If you read this, I want to know what your thoughts are, because honestly, of the 5 books that I've read for him, this is by far my favorite, and I'm kind of curious to see how, when I get into Stormlight Archive, if that's going to be comparable for me, better, or the same to Warbreaker, because I just have such a high opinion of this book. It was really so well done. If you want to help support me, the best thing you can do is hit like and subscribe. If you want to follow me on Instagram, where you can see what I'm reading and we can chat about books, you can find me at Fantasy Awash. And as always, I will see you next time. Bye.